Hey, everybody, we are live. Excuse me, and I got a frog in my throat, which is why I have coffee. It's Joe McCarthy, MoJOE, with my good friend John Wyrow. John, what are you doing?
Oh, just hanging out in the beautiful Michigan spring weather. It's about 45 degrees out here. It's lovely.
45 degrees. If it gets to 45 degrees out here in Orange County, then people just won't go outdoors because they're afraid they're going to freeze to death.
What's funny is this is actually pretty comfortable for me. I'm a good old Michigan boy.
Yeah. I grew up from Montana, so all my friends and relatives say I've become a weather wimp, which is, basically true. But I do remember the days. Yeah, and then my days, of course, in Minneapolis with Rick Olson, where I thought winters were bad in Montana until I got to Minneapolis, and then I had no idea what winters were. Yeah. Do you get the lake effect? I've heard a lot of people say Michigan, depending on where you are, you get a lake effect.
Yeah, I would say the lake definitely impacts the weather around here, but I'm far enough. Most of that's coming off of Lake Michigan on the west side of the state, and I'm over here more in the thumb area, as we all do.
Yeah.
Yeah, on that west side of the state, Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, all those places, they just get nailed with that lake effect snow.
Well, I love the fact that technology has not only brought us together because we met in a virtual classroom and we become friends, really good friends, in just a short period of time, but now we can still share life even though we're halfway across the country from each other. For those of you that missed it a couple weeks ago, John and I had an amazing conversation. He was in his living room, I was in my backyard, and we were talking about things that really are important to us that we think are actually can really be important to others as well. And one of those is leadership development, organizational development, and how some of our education and experience can apply in real life settings. And one of the great moments was we were talking about the natural tendencies when you're under stress is flight or fright, and then we talked about freeze, and those are kind of the three popular ones. And then we were talking about, well, what's a better alternative? And at first I was like, well, engage. No, that doesn't start with an F. And so John's talking and talking, and I go, I got it. Flight, fright, freeze. But the best answer is flourish. And John says, that's it. I'm copywriting that right now before it gets published. I think you said you had some more thoughts on that since then. Is that right?
Well, yeah, and it's funny. I woke up this morning and was doing my normal, just kind of praying while I was laying in bed, and started thinking about what the day was going to bring. And first of all, I started thinking about MoJOE, and for some reason the song, I started thinking MoJOE rising, the Doors, right? Yeah, gotta keep on rising. So I'm thinking about the Doors, and then all of a sudden, yeah, you got it, man. So it reminded me, a friend of mine that we played music around town here, been a good friend of mine for a long time. He sent me an article not too long ago about the Doors, actually. And it was talking about, and I'm not going to get all the details perfect here, but it was talking about how, the song Roadhouse Blues by the Doors? Yeah. So basically, I guess, long story short of the Doors' history, they had this one producer that they had been working with for a while, and he was kind of directing their how they were doing things and kind of moving them along. Well, they had a pretty good career already, and had several albums out there, and they were quite successful. But then, they started getting off the deep end, getting into the crazy stuff, and Jim Morrison started getting kind of chubby, and this producer's like, you know what, you guys are done. I'm out. You're washed up. So the producer walks out, and so there at first, imagine the stress there. Like all of a sudden, okay, our producer that's been with us from day one is out. And I started thinking about our conversations. Like, okay, well, what were their options? Well, they could fight, right? They could probably get angry with each other, point fingers, blame each other for everything. They could flight. They could flee, right? They could do flight. They could just get out. Yeah, we're done. You know what? He's right. We're washed up. It's over. And then we talked about freeze. They could sit there and do nothing. What they did was they flourished. They actually took the fact that they no longer had this guy who was kind of trying to steer them, and they busted free with all of their creativity. They came out with Roadhouse Blues, and that whole album, I believe Roadhouse Blues is an album in itself, and everything on there was one of their biggest hits. And I was just like, whoa, there's the 4 Fs right there. They could have done anything. That was a stressful situation. They felt like they were done, washed up. Their big producer walked out on them. All of a sudden, they came out with the best thing they ever did. So there's my MoJOE rising moment for the morning.
There's two other F's as you're talking that came to mind, and I've done a talk where the two concepts are reframe, and I'll do it like RE with a colon and then frame, and then refocus, RE colon focus. So the frame and focus are really the two big things, two more F's. And it dovetails very well in what you're talking about right here, because it's what you see is what you get. And this happens in the real world. It happens in business. It happens everywhere you go, that whatever you pay attention to, it shows up. And some would even say you're creating it, because that's what your mind is focusing on, right? So depending on what you focus on will really decide where's your life going to go from there. And then the other is reframing. So this is a concept back from my organizational development program. The circumstances aren't changing, but the way you look at it can. And there's always many facets to any problem or any issue or anything that you're facing. And if you can just take a moment to refocus and to reframe, you can actually find out that, like the Doors did, what looks like the end of the road might actually be the launch pad to something much greater. And I go ahead.
I was just going to say, think about the parallels of everything you just said and this door story with what has happened in our lives in the last year. Not to mention, Rick Olson and Rick Olson seminars, how he, who is a motivational, traveling 50 weeks a year, probably speaker, gets hit with this no travel. He turns into what he calls himself a stay-at-home speaker, the stay-at-home motivational speaker. And he comes up with all these different ideas. I mean, he flourished. He could have said, you know what, I'm done. I'm going to retire. I'm out. He could have kind of frozen and been like, I guess I'll just ride it out. He could have done a million things. He just reframed, refocused, and is just kicking butt. And it reminds me of something you said recently too. You're like, I was kind of thinking about, trying to figure out my exit strategy. Where's this going to lead to retirement? And now all of a sudden we're reframed, we're refocused, we're trying to flourish. And man, I you know what I feel like right now, Joe? I like to use the roller coaster analogy a lot. And I feel like we're kind of at the top of this roller coaster. We're in the front cart and we're kind of hanging over the top and just about to just go.
I love that. Yeah. Knott's Berry Farm isn't far from where I live. And we finally got passes to Knott's Berry Farm for our family, scrimped and scraped, saved, and got all the money so we could all get passes, which is way, way less expensive than Disneyland, as you can imagine. And we got them in January of 2020. On March 13th, they shut the whole thing down. For the first time, my kids have passes to a theme park, and now they can't use them. They're like, oh, this is the worst, right? And then, as it turns out, Knott's Berry Farm has extended our passes not only into 2021, but then like way beyond. So we'll get more than our money's worth. But there's this one roller coaster at Knott's Berry Farm where it takes you up in your cart, and you're laying back. So you're facing the sky. You come up over the top, and you're kind of in a seated position, harnesses over your shoulder, and they take you until you're face down, and they stop. So you're just hanging there, like you said, and they hold you there what feels like an eternity. And you're suspended midair, and then finally they release the brakes, and you go flying through the roller coaster. And the other analogy too, John, is you're talking this whole idea of flourishing, reframing, and refocusing. Is back when I was a kid, we played with Hot Wheels race tracks a lot. So you had these orange tracks and the cars that fit in the between the bumpers, and you roll them down the hill. And it was all based on gravity until you got what was called like this accelerator station or something, and there was this you could push the track onto one side and the track coming out the other, and as the car went through, these wheels would spin on the inside, almost like a baseball pitching machine, right? And so the car would kind of almost die as coming to the station, and then the wheels would catch it and just send it out the other side. So I was like, oh, I'm almost done. I just figure out my exit strategy, time for retirement, and then out the other side.
Well, I think that's awesome, and I think that there's a lesson in that, right? I mean, it's because I think the most important thing, and this is a good segue into some of the stuff I'm doing at work right now, but the most important thing is that you intentionally went out and focused. We went on this class. We went to the Rick Olson speaking school, right? We took a step. We realized there was something more we wanted to do, and we weren't sure what it was, but we took an intentional step in a direction that we thought might lead us somewhere. And then, I think Rick is those spinning wheels that just kind of fired you off. And I've, like I said, you're one of my best friends. I talk to you more than probably anybody I talk to, and we've never even met in person. But that's the way I feel about you too. I think you and Rick are those two wheels on either side of my track right now. It's just seeing you flourish, seeing everything you're doing with with your podcast, and you got some great people that are in your network that we're talking to, and it's really cool. I honestly believe I believe we can make a positive impact on this world. It's
Yeah.
exciting, and I want to encourage anyone listening that, look for those wheels, look for those accelerators. You don't have to just sit and let the world pass you by. It's latch onto something and just go for a ride.
That's right. And really those wheels, which often are people, is momentum. And sometimes we just lose momentum, right? And we lose focus. We're all we can see is the problem. We can't see the solution. And sometimes it just takes one other person or two other people that say, well, yeah, all that is true, but here's another way to look at it, right? And then all of a sudden, you're like, oh, I didn't even see it that way. And so, in COVID terms, we call that pivot. There's a lot of businesses that were able to pivot, and they took all the same resources, all the same technology, all the same people, and just applied it a little bit differently. And they made a difference in the world and kept their business going and kept the people employed. And then there was companies that, for whatever reason, they couldn't make that change. They couldn't make that pivot. And I mean, that's true of our own lives as well. If we can't pivot with the change, then we get stuck, and sometimes we just need a little help, a little mojo to get us going again, right?
That's right. And I think, a lot of times it's hard because, a lot of us are living intentionally, right? But by doing so, we've got this focus, we've got this like end game that we're going for, and which I think is a good thing, begin with the end in mind. I believe that's a Stephen Covey thing.
Right.
But it can also, I think, tunnel vision us sometimes. And I am so proud of the organization I work at, Franklin with Credit Union. I'm so proud of so many businesses out there that did pivot and did find a way to make this work, because you can just, like I said, you can do the 4 F's, or now there's 6 of them, I think. So,
Right.
you can do the first 3 and you're not going to get anywhere. And I think that's a good lesson for, COVID, the year 2020 really made it happen, but it's something we need to think about from now until forever. We learn as
Sure.
we go, we adapt, we do what we need to survive and thrive.
Yeah. So I want to lead us into some of the stuff you're doing right now, because this is really cool stuff. But before I do, this model, this 4F or 6F model, is developing even as we speak. So there's a couple things I want to say about that. One is, in dialogue, we can often come up with something much greater between the 2 of us or 3 of us or however many people than you can on your own. And you and I both have been blessed with minds that work well and a good education, and God's blessed us on so many levels. But it's still true that if you in your backyard and I'm in my backyard, but we don't talk to each other, we wouldn't have come up with the 4F framework. That just came out of the conversation. Now we've got 6 Fs, and we definitely have a book in the works somewhere here. But I was thinking, in stress, in crisis, there's the freeze, the flight, the fright. But how do you get to flourish? Really, this is the 2 Fs we just talked about in the middle. This is the transition to get from those 3, which aren't productive, to get to the flourish, which is where we want to be. That's where you have to reframe and refocus. So really, you've got the 3 Fs, and then you've got the valley, right, where you're stuck. But by reframing and refocusing, you come out the other side, and you're on your way. So now we got a cool model and a way to illustrate it right here.
I was going to say, yeah, and we've got you got the book already divided into 2 parts, man. This thing's writing itself.
And I got an illustration right here in my hand. Got to be careful how I do that, though. It might come across wrong.
Right, be careful.
So, John, just give us the overview of this stuff you're doing at the credit union right now, which is just awesome. And then we probably won't have time to get into the details, but we'll dig in deeper as to how that's going as other episodes are published.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I can even tie it into what you were just saying about how we've kind of been, we've created these ideas out of nothing, and just one of us thinking on our own wouldn't accomplish that, right? We were working together because we have developed this relationship where we can bounce these ideas. And so that's kind of what I believe is the ticket. If I look back at my past a little bit, when I was younger, I definitely, was all about, making friends, probably more so. And I probably didn't do it in the right way. I know I didn't do it all in the right ways back then. And then as I was getting older, I kind of, it's like, I kind of started focusing inward. I almost kind of reclused a little bit as I was aging a little bit. And then, it dawned on me that the most important thing we can do is connect with each other. And that's every human being we cross. And I think we can agree that this is important now more than ever with the social unrest and the pandemic, and we're like forced to not be able to interact with each other one on one. I think that's when we need to push forward and make more relationships, make more connections. And when I say the word relationship, I'm talking about anything. I'm talking about a long-term, you could romantic relationship. You could talk about your family, your spouse, your work group, church groups, anything under the sun. It could be a quick 2-minute conversation with a customer, client, or a member that you never talk to again. It is so important to just pour your energy and positivity and focus into these individuals, because you never know what's going to come out of it. And it's not all self-serving. You never know what you're going to give them, but you might brighten their day and make their day life better. You don't know what they're going through.
Yeah.
And this is my long introduction into
Hey, before you get into the details, let me just jump in there, because this is really good, and I don't want people to miss it. There's a very common phrase, it comes right out of the Bible. People don't even know that that's the source, but it says it's better to give than to receive. Now, as a kid, I always struggled with that. You got to be kidding, especially at Christmas time. No, it's always better to receive. I want the gifts, right? And then the more you grow and the more you realize that when you're on the giving end, you get and you give. So when you give, you get the joy of seeing somebody receive what you give. And so that's a gift unto itself. I mean, and then they receive as well. So it's like there's this multiplication effect, like you're talking about in relationships. And I think a lot of people, when they hear, concentrate on the other person and see what you can give, they're like, but I'm depleted. I have nothing to give. I need to be refreshed. And there are certainly seasons where that happens. But here's the cool thing is that in focusing on the other, in focusing on service, in focusing on what do I have to contribute? That's really the question. What do I have to contribute here? Then you feel good about yourself as well. And it comes back to you. And some people say, it's the law of sowing and reaping, or karma, or whatever you want to call it. But it's that counterintuitive thing that as you give what you have, as small as that may be, the seed's planted, it flourishes, and you get to bear the fruit, and then you get to see others as well. So that's just a really, really important biblical life-changing principle and it's so simple, but it's so true.
100% agreed. And thank you for interjecting there, because that was perfect. And and what we're in my opinion here, what we're talking about, in order to do this, we have to be intentional about what we're going for. So we're kind of going towards that concept of purposeful living or intentional living. You can't just happen to brighten someone's day. You need to go out and do it, right? And I think that's where it all starts. I mean, people can post anything they want, or we can, put these live broadcasts out there. And yes, I really hope it's making an impact on the world, but we as individuals need to focus on our neighbor down the street. We need to focus on our spouses and our children and our families. And so where it starts in my mind, where this all comes down to, what I'm really talking about is emotional intelligence. It was a concept that I don't believe I had ever been introduced to before. And I started my master's program. One of the first classes I had was just called emotional intelligence. And after that, every class, every project, every research paper, I couldn't help but include that. It is like the building blocks of what we're talking about here. It's the building blocks of every motivational speech you've ever heard, or every self-help book, is to first get a healthy dose of, or a healthy understanding, and to build on this emotional intelligence. So it's actually a course that I've created one step of it, and it's called, I'm in the process of creating the next step, but at the Franklin Credit Union, I'm developing this LEAD program, and it's starting with Leading Without a Title was the first course that I completed. And the point is being that you don't need to be a supervisor. You don't need to be a manager. You don't have to have some sort of titled position to be a leader. You might not even want to be in those type of positions, but if we lead ourselves through our daily lives in a proper way, and if we lead, like I said, our family, or even just a conversation, or you run into somebody at the grocery store, be a leader and try to make some sort of positive impact on that. So that's really what the core of it is. And like you said, we could talk for days about emotional intelligence, but what I did was I broke it down into the 4 different domains of emotional intelligence: the self-awareness, self-management, social awareness. The last one is called relationship management. Well, it depends which book you read. Every guru says something different. I've been trying to call it like relationship development. I haven't even found the word quite yet. In biblical terms, to me, the word hesed keeps coming up. Hesed, that Greek word of love, about the human connection and almost the need and the attachment that we have for each other, and that's what we're really trying to promote.
Right. So for people who aren't familiar with emotional intelligence, this has become very popular in the last, gosh, probably 30 years or so. It was a big component of my degree program at Pepperdine, which I took back in the early 2000s. And I had never heard the term before. But really, the simplest form of emotional intelligence is two components in my mind anyway. One is compassion, and the other is empathy. And really, they're two sides of the same coin. But the idea is leadership from a point of understanding and caring about what the other person is up to and doing and what their motivation is and all that kind of stuff. And you see this a lot now in John Maxwell's stuff. You see it in Simon Sinek, who come at it from really different points of view, where they say leadership isn't telling people what to do or showing, just showing the way or just doing it yourself and hoping people follow. Leadership is creating leaders beneath you and empowering them to do it their way, and then everybody wins. That's a really simplistic way of looking at it. But quite honestly, if you don't care about what the other person thinks or knows or does or feels, then you're never going to have any emotions around where they're coming from, what they have to contribute. In fact, it's really a military model where it's just shut up and do what I say, no talking back, right? And that works in a military situation. In war, of course, you need people to just respond to the leader immediately to save everybody's life and to hopefully to win. But unfortunately, that same model has been laid over organizations where it's all about hierarchy and structure and reporting and all that kind of stuff. And it just takes the humanity and the relationships right out of it. And I think you would say this as well, it sucks the soul out of an organization where, they might produce things, but they're killing people in the process.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the opposite of what we want, right? It reminds me, I keep going back to this too. It reminds me of the concept of conscious capitalism. It's a book that I'm just about finished with, and it was introduced to me by a consultant here around the Midland area in Michigan. And we can't do things that sacrifice anything of our stakeholders. If we're making decisions at work that are sacrificing the morale of your team, and this all boils down to the bottom line. But in my opinion, that's not why we do it. I mean, we need to, again, we're trying to make this world a better place. We're trying to improve each other's lives. We see our bosses more than we see our own family a lot of times during the working years of our lives. And if we're not happy at work, if there's not a certain level of satisfaction there at work, that's a big gap of happiness in your entire life. So that's why we have to intentionally go about this. And the beauty of this whole thing is, with the most altruistic intentions of being a positive leader and drawing greatness out of others. That's one of Rick Olson's thing. I always love what he says, drawing greatness out of others. That does impact the bottom line. It all works. You can lead from your heart. You can work from your heart and do what you know in your heart is right, and have a successful business. So why don't we all do it?
Yeah. I think there's like this. It's a counterintuitive sense that for leaders in particular who are really, really concerned about the bottom line and about the stakeholders, especially the ones that are financial, and that I think there's this fear. This is probably the crux of it, right? There's this fear that if they don't concentrate on the profitability, then somehow they're going to lose their business. But it's wrong. It's flipped on its head. Well, yes, there are companies that actually do thrive that way. They thrive in terms of productivity and profit. They don't thrive in terms of people development or human resources, right? In fact, that's just kind of like the bane of their existence. I've even heard people say, well, those are great principles, Joe, but if you go to any Fortune 500 company, you won't find any of that. And I'm like, well, that doesn't have to be that way. And in fact, when I said that to Rick Olson, he said, well, these companies, they are doing really well, right? They're making tons of money. They're making a difference in the world in terms of profit and productivity. However, if they would take these principles and apply them and turn their organizations into empathy and compassion, where they really did care about their own workers as much as they cared about their customers, it would take all that stuff to a whole nother level. And I think that's where you have to go past the fear of, well, if I concentrate on the people, or if I just think about soft skills, then my profit margin is going to go down, and my investors aren't going to be happy. But that's not true at all, right?
Absolutely not. I mean, especially in the terms of like turnover, right? I mean, if
Yeah.
people are living in fear of losing their job, they're not bringing their best. They're just kind of bringing their yikes, I got to do what I got to do to keep my job.
Right.
So you're not allowing them to flourish. There's another one of our F's there. You're not allowing them to bring their full A game, and as such, you're not getting as much as you can out of them. And again, that's not the purpose here, but it is a awesome result. It's an awesome side
Yeah.
effect.
Absolutely.
So
So it's just really about, where do you start, right? You start with profitability as your focus, or do you start with people as your focus, and you end up with both? You get good people and you get profitability.
absolutely, and get the best out of them. And yeah, and
Yeah.
honestly, this boils down to, still, in my opinion, it boils down to emotional intelligence, both at the individual level, right? And a lot of people say it starts with the leader and then it'll trickle down. But even building a solid emotional intelligence with all your individuals, all the frontline workers, is just, benefits are through the roof. You can go so far. You know, there's a couple books. If you are just getting dipped into emotional intelligence, to back up a step, like Joe was saying, these concepts have been around forever. I agree. It was a guy named Daniel Goleman back in the 90s. I think he really brought it to light, and put kind of the term into light, and then almost brought the science behind it. Because it's not just soft skills. There's actually real science behind what we're talking about here. The impact we can have on each other as humans, and also how we process what we perceive, right? We always process it in our emotional center before our logical center. So there's two things, definitely. There's a book called The Emotional Intelligence 2.0 by Travis Bradbury and somebody Greaves. Either way, if you've never gotten into emotional intelligence before, that's a great start. It's really basic and gives tons of strategies to work on it. One of my favorite books after that is called Primal Leadership, and it's by Daniel Goleman and another fella. And they take it to a whole new level. You know, the intelligence between groups, and not just being self-aware and self-management as an individual, but then who are we as an organization, or who are we as a department, and how do other departments rely on us, and how do we feed off of them, and how do we work together? So the literature out there is through the roof, and it's awesome.
Hey, we're almost out of time for this podcast, but I just realized, and again, I love this real-time discussion where ideas are bubbling up even as we talk, right, in this conversation. And I encourage people to have these dialogues, because it's amazing what can come out of them. But earlier we came up with the 4 F's, and we saw that the valley was reframing and refocusing. And this works on the individual level. It also works on the organizational level, but it works especially on the leadership level. So if you're a leader, or you're aspiring leader, and you don't know much about emotional intelligence, but you do think that people are far more important than profit, well, when you face crisis as a leader, you can flight, fright, freeze. But how do you get to flourish? You reframe and you refocus. So this is an emotional intelligence journey. And it does feel like you're going down for a while, right? Because it's all new and it's risky and you're not sure what's going to happen. But if you stick with it long enough, you persist, then you end up on the flourish side, not just for you, but for the people that you work with, or the people that you lead, and for your organization, and as you said, for all of your stakeholders. So this is rich. It's fascinating. It's real. It's true. It's helpful. It's impactful. And of course, John and I are not the end all and be all of all the information there is about any of this stuff. We're just enjoying learning about it, and hoping that by sharing it, others can enjoy it as well. So in future episodes, we're going to dive deeper into what John's going through in his organization and what he's taking them through, which is an outflow directly of our conversation here. So I hope those that have tuned in have enjoyed this time. I know I have. So at the very least, these dialogues are rich and wonderful and enriching to my life. And we hope that it can have an impact on others. We're going to post all of our contact information, both here on the live stream, but also on the podcast, which will come out shortly. And that's at mojo.studio. So from John, from JW, And MoJOE, thank you for tuning in and joining us today, whatever day and time that is, because on the internet, it could be any time and any place. And just remember, in the most stressful of times, there is an option beyond flight, fright, and freeze. And that's flourish. It just takes a little journey. Thank you, John, for joining us today.
Cheers.
Cheers.